Hello everyone and welcome to this 4K UHD Blu-ray review of James Cameron's Truelies. I must confess that I was hesitant to do so. This edition has been so harshly criticized from all sides that I didn't see any point in adding another layer. But many of you asked for this test, and new elements have made me want to make another documented video. This will also be an opportunity to call on David Verkreken once again, director, creator of dvdvision magazine, and author of the book James Cameron, A Filmmaker's Odyssey, which has enabled me to unearth a few nuggets. Make yourselves comfortable, because I've got a lot to show you and a lot to tell you. Truelies is a 1994 film, shot on Super 35mm film by cinematographer Russell Carpenter. The means at his disposal were Dantesque. In an interview in American Cinematographer, he revealed that he had at least a dozen cameras at his disposal, including two ARRI 4BL, two ARRI 3 IMAX, a movie cam for Steadicam work, Cameron's own ARRI 2C, and a modified ARRI called Fast Cam with video feedback. His basic lenses were Zeiss primes and Cock zooms. In this article, we also learn that both Cameron and Carpenter maintain that those prints, struck in both 35mm and 70mm, are among the finest they have ever produced. The 35mm prints of Truelies are very good, but the 70s look like IMAX by comparison. Cameron attributes the startling improvement to Kodak's new 5244 EXR color intermediate stock. 5244 employs ultrafine silver halide crystals and a new generation of advanced color couplers to produce cleaner, sharper images with considerably reduced granularity. This clarity shows up most dramatically in the film's blacks, which Cameron describes as bulletproof. Keep this in the back of your mind, because the film's sharpness, granularity, and blacks as bulletproof. We'll come back to it. The film was finalized in 2:39:1 for theatrical release, and will be available in a variety of formats for home video. Among others, there was a first VHS full screen in 1995, a widescreen and pan and scan laserdisc in the same year, a new VHS widescreen edition in 1996, a new laserdisc edition in 1998 with a DTS track, a DVD Zone 1 in 4x3 letterbox in 1999, a DVHS version in 2003, leading to numerous streaming versions, and a famous Spanish Blu Ray in 2020. In 2022, a new version of the film appeared on the Hulu platform, and that, too, we'll save for later. This new edition is presented in HDR10 and Dolby Vision. We find a new English mix in Dolby Atmos, and, notably, a French track in DTS-HD High Resolution. Extras are included on the full HD Blu Ray. There's a new documentary Fear is Not an Option in HD, and an archive that includes trailers, the original script, storyboards, blueprints, photos, and posters from the film. You wanted me to test, so we're going to test, but I warn you, I've got nothing but mysteries and not the slightest hint of justification. Officially, the film has been rescanned. The restoration work was once again carried out by the Pokrode company. As it turns out, watching a decade-old demo from Reliance Media Works, which had already worked on the restoration of Titanic, shots from Truelies can be seen. Restoration work did indeed take place around 2012. There were rumors of a possible Blu-ray release in late 2018. In this clip, we can also see shots of the Abyss, whose color grading matches the latest version, even though the demo is in SDR. So I don't know if the scan is recent, or if it's been sleeping in a safe for years. In any case, the sources seem different from those used for previous versions. The image is different in terms of geometry, quality, and color grading. It has been cleaned. If you look at the image, you can see the dirt common to the DVD, DVHS, and streaming versions, which has disappeared from the new version. Shots also appear to have been stabilized. As the film was shot in Super 35 like Abyss, there's a lot of margin at the top and bottom of the image, which gives latitude for reframing. I know that color grading can work miracles, but I find it hard to believe that this image could be achieved from the same source used to make this version. But, because there's always a but, like Abyss, we also have shots very similar to the previous versions. So it's hard to say for sure where the sources for this new version came from. This will be our number one mystery. For comparison purposes, I've recovered the following versions. The VHS version, so yes, I hear you laugh. You say, what interest? Be patient. the DVD Zone 1, the DVD Zone 2, the famous DVHS version in interlaced HD, the Spanish Blu Ray itself from this DVHS, a 35mm trailer from the period, a hybrid open matte version in HD, which corresponds to the version used by Stars, but with grain, and above all, the Hulu version. And now you won't believe your eyes. This is the same source with the same color grading as the 4K edition of 2024 in SDR, but with grain and without Parkroads retouching. So, knowing that this version had already been approved for release, we can only wonder why they wanted to go even further, and why it took 2 years to come up with this new version. This will be our mystery number 2. If I take some images from the sequence that sent the web into a frenzy, comparing them with a 4K HDR version, it's clear that the level of retouching is not at all the same. Grain is clearly present, and contours are not enhanced. So what's the point? Why several versions from the same color grading? I'm not talking about deliverables in terms of broadcast standards. No, I'm talking about a version of the film. Why a non-retouched, non-degrained version in 2022, and why this new version 2 years later? Why did they do such extensive retouching? Because yes, these retouches are so strong on certain shots that they took me out of the film several times. I'll tell you right now, I don't have the answer. I do have an idea, but it's only a partial answer. Watching the film more closely, I became aware of a problem which I think could explain the use of these tools to a far greater extent than on The Abyss, Aliens, and Titanic. I don't know why, I don't know how, but this film has a stratospheric number of shots where the focus is approximate. I'd never paid any attention to it, because it didn't shock me when I saw it on DVD with the TVs of the time. But now it's all I can see. There are ultra-defined shots where you can count the hairs on your beard, and shots where the focus is never where it should be. Look at this field against field. The definition on Bill Paxton is surgical. On Arnold, the focus is on his watch, his cold shirt, but not on his eyes. It's soft. We won't go so far as to say blurry, but it's soft. In this shot, Bill Paxton is speaking. The focus is on the car behind them. In this dialogue scene, the focus is never on Tom Arnold. Charlton Heston, same fight, totally limp. We get the focus on Arnold, but not on Jamie Lee Curtis counterfield. This scene with Bill Paxton and Jamie Lee Curtis, the focus is on the kitchen countertop. They're soft, and Bill Paxton becomes sharp just as the shot changes. This shot of Jamie Lee Curtis, it's soft. This one is out of focus. This shot of Art Malik, also soft. Here the focus is on the car. This one, the focus is on the portholes behind. And the list goes on. I've never seen anything like it. Shots out of focus or soft do happen, but at this level of quantity, it's rare. So it's not catastrophic, but once you've noticed, there's a huge disparity throughout the film. I don't understand. It must be due to the shooting. In fact, if you look closely at the DVHS or any other version, the problems are definitely there. But when you go to 4K on a good-sized TV, it's getting hard to ignore. It seems surprising that Cameron and Carpenter are so proud of their 35 and 70mm prints with so many focus problems. As you can see from this article, James and his DP leave nothing to chance and have perfect mastery of the entire photochemical chain. From the camera to the film to the machines used to print the intermediate versions, everything is examined with a fine-tooth comb, and tests are carried out to find out how the film will react, how the grain will look, and how much information will be lost between the negative and the projection copies. So how do you arrive at this result when you know Cameron's exacting standards? It's incomprehensible. That will be mystery number 3. Now, I have to admit that on closer inspection, I don't understand the changes made by the Parkroad tools and, above all, the choice of application. I'm not going to get into the AI debate, because once again we don't know the nature of the tools used, but looking at the number of shots lacking definition, why this sequence is the one that seems most impacted. Because when you look at the Hulu version, these shots are nowhere near as problematic as some I've shown you before. And I don't think the results are homogeneous. Certainly on Arnold, the level of detail is very accentuated. But on Tom Arnold, I'm sorry, but we've lost some material in certain parts of his face, and some strange things appear. Why reinforce this shot, which clearly doesn't need it, and leave this one totally blurred? But what bothers me most is this shot. There's no denying that the focus isn't there. So they try to reinforce it, but the problem is that the depth of this image has become totally incoherent. The man and the stones are in focus. The man next to him is out of focus, but Arnold is in focus. The table is out of focus, the socket is in focus, but the wall above it is not. In the middle, we're in focus on the chair. The man is out of focus, but the guy behind is in focus. His neighbor is out of focus, but the stone at the back is in focus. It doesn't make sense. Arnold's face seems to have been added like this actors. All this, combined with a very strong grain reduction, sometimes gives results that are far from the original silver look. But then again, James and grain are a different story. I don't understand these choices and this lack of homogeneity. There must be an explanation. So here is mystery number 4. Let's continue the mystery and talk about color grading. But just before I launch into a bottomless pit, I'd like us to take 2 minutes to look at a few images from another, slightly older film, also shot on Super 35. The aim is not to give good or bad points, but to make you aware of what I'm showing you when I display a curve on an oscilloscope. As you can see, this Top Gun image is rich in dynamics. Even if the light intensities don't go through the roof, there's a great amplitude between the highest and lowest parts. That's dynamics, contrast, the famous high dynamic range. As you can see, the signal is precise with peaks and variations, not limited or crushed. If I convert this image to SDR, here's what you get when you re-import it into an HDR workflow. It's more or less the same, except that the signal has been remapped into a smaller container, so there's nothing left that exceeds 100 nits. But the signal is remapped but not crushed, so it retains detail despite everything. SDR diffuse white is set at 100 nits, HDR at 203 nits. It's a standard. For example, when you're watching credits, the white of the font isn't supposed to exceed 203 nits. Anything above that is reserved for displaying highlights, speculars, and other brightness. In general, most Dolby content is limited to 1000 nits. HDR will also make it possible to render more information in low light. The aim is not to give you completely black blacks, but to be able to go very low while retaining detail. The same goes for colorimetry. HDR can display nuances that cannot be displayed in SDR, and also saturation in highlights that SDR is unable to reproduce. We don't need to display 1000 nits, just the possibility of displaying in this space what we couldn't see in previous SDR versions. So, back to our friend truelies. The film has been given a facelift. Once again, I won't get into the debate of whether or not a work should be modified. The question remains, though, why such a reworking on this one, and not on Titanic or Aliens, which are almost exact copies of their SDR versions? Honestly, when you look at the image quality of the previous versions, it really needed it. Some scenes have really been sublimated, with superb detail and much more pleasing colorimetry. But as with the sharpness retouching, it's far from homogeneous. While some scenes offer fine contrasts, there are a few where black levels aren't quite so bulletproof. Let's take a look at these images. The blacks are lifted, they're dull for some reason. If you compare with the old SDR versions, look at the difference. In this shot, too, the blacks are totally detached. The image becomes milky. It's a curious bias. Let's look at the whites. They're charred. Maybe it's an artistic intention. Why not? It's true that in the 90s and 2000s, the fashion was for burnt whites. And it's already clear from older versions that in many places the whites are very high. But we could perhaps hope to recover a little information with the HDR of this new version. Unfortunately, in many shots, the signal is totally crushed. Look at this scene. On the hoods of the cars, there's no information at all. The signal is literally amputated. There are no nuances. Everything that should make HDR so useful, the fact that we can recover matter, is missing. They've turned up the luminosity on almost the entire film, and sometimes in a very pronounced way. We still have clipping on fabrics. It's not shiny or specular on metal, it's fabric. Milky blacks and whites at 200 nits. Dynamic range takes a beating. As I said, this lack of information in the highlights is nothing new. When you look at previous versions, there's not much detail either. You can already see that we were already having problems with the fabrics. Let's go back to this shot of the skier on display. So it's time to pull out the mystery card. Remember the VHS? The info exists. It was already there on the VHS, on the DVD Zone 1, and you can see it on the other versions. If you take this shot and look at the hoods of the cars, I'm sorry, but on the DVD Zone 1 and the VHS, the info is there. It was reduced a little on the versions that followed before being annihilated by the latest version. And by the way, the Hulu version shows the same symptoms. There may be some grain, and we may not have the drift of retouching, but the exploded color grading is definitely there. So I ask you, how is it possible that by rescanning the film we get a version with less info in the highlights than the signal from the 1995 VHS or the 1999 Zone 1 DVD? The info should have been on the scan, but disappeared afterwards. The question is whether this is deliberate. Here is our mystery number 5. Where it gets comical is that in this article Carpenter tells us, one major difficulty in shooting snow is that if you're backlighting snow, it will sometimes go much too bright, he adds. That sometimes works to your advantage by giving you dramatic contrast, but it can also just blow out the scene. Jim came up with a solution that was pretty simple and brilliant at the same time. We just raked the snow at a 90-degree angle from the light, and it completely broke it up and knocked 2 stops off the snow. I thought that was really clever. So they went to a lot of trouble during the shoot to avoid burning the film as much as possible, so that in the end it's all burnt up today. I admit I don't really understand the project. And it's true that the use of light here, with the impacts in the snow, is absolutely magnificent, at least back when we could still see detail. Look at this explosion. All the flames and smoke have disappeared. And yet they were there before. Here's a 35mm open matte trailer from the era. Even with poor quality encoding, you can see that there was material in those flames. Here we see a mass of white. Look at the helicopter shot. The smoke is burnt out in all previous versions. But if you look at the MediaWoks demo, you can see that there's a bit more matter. The more you try to raise the levels, the more likely it is that if the base image is already a little overexposed, you run the risk of burning away what little detail and nuance you have. But there are ways of preserving the highlights. This also has the effect of making previously more or less hidden stunt lining more visible. And what's worse, it's not even homogeneous. Because in some shots, you still recover a lot of details. That's mystery number 6. It's getting to be a lot. What happened to this film? Was there a problem with the preservation of the negative? Just for information, because some people don't realize what's at stake. Here's what James Cameron had to say about the restoration of Titanic. In Super 35, you're dealing with a smaller image area on the ONEG, so you have to be more aware of the accumulated dirt and damage that happens to a negative every time it's handled and a print is struck. In the case of Titanic, which cost $190 million and runs 20 reels, the negative cost about $9 million per 1,000 roll. If you take into account what it would take to replace the roll, it has no price. So every time that hourly paid technician at the lab gets that thing out of the vault and puts it on the printing machine, he's carrying $9 million in his hands. That's like carrying around somebody's baby. You're not going to play catch with somebody's baby too often, so why do it with your negative? You might indeed wonder when you see the result, because going to all that trouble to rescan a negative, running the risk of damaging it, only to release a version with such a crushed signal. It's a concept. As much as I'm pretty level-headed about Aliens and Titanic, frankly sticking a Dolby Vision sticker on this edition, that was a bold move. It's time to take a deep breath and bring out altitude 32 to analyze the Dolby Atmos track with the altitude object viewer, and pray that the mix raises the level, and thank God it does. The new Atmos mix in English is demonic, but at the same time, there's plenty of material. Between the gunfire, helicopters, fighter planes and missiles, it's a real spectacle in every channel. Whether it's on a simple outdoor rainy night, the famous Uzi scene, or the whole last part of the film, everything is a pretext to fill your ears and offer you an incredible immersive experience. Once again, Atmos is only available on the 4K version and not on the HD Blu-ray. And you'll have to make do with a French DTS track that, while very effective, is inevitably much more timid. So, it's very uneven and, frankly, disappointing given the expectations. And there are so many things I can't explain. This edition is a real textbook case. That said, it's not as unwatchable as many say. It's clearly not up to my expectations, but from my own point of view, and I know there are a few of you out there who'll have a stroke. I much prefer this version to the infamously colorful mush we've been getting for over 20 years. Now I'm playing devil's advocate. We're a niche within a niche. We focus on things that most people couldn't care less about. I think that if you take 100 people at random in the street and do a blind test, a tiny minority will notice the problems I've just outlined. The majority will completely overlook them if they're not shown and won't give a damn. Because despite all the criticism leveled at these editions, the films have been snapped up and sold like hotcakes. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions. I'd like to thank David Quicken again for his invaluable help, and I invite you to visit the dvdvision website, where pre-orders for the next issue are now open. You can see the covers of the different editions. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for your support and messages. Share the content. It's important. This channel is totally free, unsponsored, unmonetized. Its success really depends on your sharing. I'm counting on you. Take care and see you soon. Goodbye.